And now it is my great pleasure to welcome Mr. Wiewiórowski, European Data Protection Supervisor. Mr. Wiewiórowski, thank you very much for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Honorable representatives of the government, presidency, my fellow colleagues from data protection authorities, ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests. That's a great privilege for me to address this conference today and to be with you here in Zagreb. It's a new year, new decade, and it's appropriate that the newest member of the EU assumes the presidency of the Council of the European Union this year. For me, this is also the personal visit, because 27 years ago, I started my work with European affairs in the European Law Center Station, where the president of the International Board was Andrej Plenković, now the Prime Minister of Croatia. Croatia has adopted its first EU-style data protection law in 2003. There is also mentioned in the Constitution about the privacy and about data protection. And I see that the Constitution says about the right to safety, security of the personal data. You may not be aware of the fact that this year is also the golden anniversary of the data protection law in Europe. 50 years ago, the state of Hessen in Germany has passed the first data protection law, 30th of September 1970. The state lawmakers were reacting at this time to the creation in 1969, the integrated data sets of the government in Hessen. Excitement about the benefits of this automated transformation and processing of the data also raised concerns about the loss of privacy and too much power given to the state. Members of the Hessen Assembly looked at the reports from the states and from the other the other countries of Europe, and they decided to pass the law. It was the world's first data protection law, and Hesse law focused on public sector mainly. That was the big brother we were afraid of at this time. That was the big brother that my country was afraid in the 90s when we started in the new democracy to create the data protection law for Poland. And at the same time, the notions of controller, supervisor, data subject have been already sketched in these laws in the 70s, although the terminology was still very fluid. And after these 50 years, and after 10 years of discussion about the new regime of the data protection law, 10 years after the first reports were proposed, some people may think that the appetite for more data protection law has been already exhausted. But the start of the new decade, we can detect that there is a shift of the tectonic plates. Digitization has taken over our lives in the space of 20 years. Much of this exponential growth in connectivity of the data processing was driven by private industry, by private entities. And many of them are coming from the west coast of US. Business models that emerged responded to fanatical belief among the investors that the data is the oil, the fuel of the new economy. I don't like this metaphor. So the services should be provided below the cost or even for free in exchange for collecting the data about the people. These data would be stored in proprietary clouds and monitored and then monetized, typically through the online advertisements. The tectonic plates, what I mean? Well, first of all, Europe was always struggled to compete on the market with the companies that grew in US or with state-owned data processing in China. In particular, Europe doesn't seem to be in control of its own data, and the Commissioner Thierry Breton has said it last week. He said that Europeans need more control over their own data. Europeans should be owners of their data, and these data should be processed in Europe according to our rules and values. We cannot continue to live in the world where 5 or 6 big actors are holding 80% of the data on the planet while not accepting responsibility for now what the data is used for. Indeed, these data localization laws are spreading in the world, but we don't want to make localization of the data, we want to have the control over what we do with it. Secondly, people are starting to object to the constant tracking and targeting which the business models are relied on. This week, Google announced the intention that the third-party cookies will not be allowed in Chrome browser. And the UK Data Protection Authority has said, in effect, that the online advertisement ecosystem involves systematic violation of the GDPR. The European Court of Justice is gradually clarifying what it means by to give the consent in a freely and valid way. What does it mean for data processing? Thirdly, there is a generation shift. You can call it Generation Z, you can call it millennials, but these people are right now finishing their schools, they are entering the market, they are entering politics, they are entering activism in NGOs. They never experienced life without being connected to internet, so they are digital natives. They want to be in the control of what they do in the world which is their world, the digital one. Again, EU Court of Justice is developing the body case law which delimits the ability to process the data by the third parties. The Advocate General, in the opinion this week, said that in the retention case, reiterates that incompatibility of the EU law of blanket data retention on all communication data without demonstrably good reason is appearing. This is a platform of jurisprudence for re-engineering digital society according to fundamental rights in Europe. You can find many articles that are predicting the trends for next decade. We say about cybersecurity, computing, edge computing, which probably will follow the cloud computing, quantum computing, augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, whatever it means. But these are the fortune tellers who say that the 20s of this century will be the decade of privacy. Around the globe, there are more and more countries with the new data protection laws. The presidency, the Croatian presidency, in its strategy recognized that we need secure connectivity and Internet of Things devices proliferate, so the opportunities of malicious and hostile actors to exploit these vulnerabilities are exploding as well. It recognized the need for digitization to enhance, not damage, the freedom and democracy. Proposals will come from the European Commission soon in each of the areas. The data strategy, the artificial intelligence white paper, the European Democracy Action Plan, the Digital Services Act, they will address this platform world and the platform liability. Presidency will also prioritize unblocking progress towards reformed rules on confidentiality of electronic communication, meaning e-privacy. I hope it will be possible as well. Data protection is either highly relevant or the core of these initiatives. In coming weeks, I will publish the strategy for the new mandate of EDPS, and the heart of this will be the activity on the integrity of our data sets. The EU and especially the DPAs have to be beyond the reproach in the how to process the personal information. That is why we have been enforcing the rules in relation to the EU bodies and agencies, and their contacts with the external world. That is why I had to prohibit the European Asylum Office scrapping the social data concerning the refugees where it had no proper legal basis. That is why I had to reprimand the European Parliament for the violations that happened during the European elections and the fact that the data has been passed, the data of more than 300,000 Europeans were passed to the external processor without the proper safeguards. And alongside Anto, my Croatian friend, and his excellent team, I'm doing all that I can to ensure that European Data Protection Board will be the credible, effective body to introduce the rules from the GDPR. Over the next 5 or 10 years, I want the data protection to become not just one of the things on the market, probably the barrier, but something that will promote the well and fair organized business. And the trivial, unethical deployment of automated facial recognition technologies, for example, will not be possible. If we decide to use that technology, we decide to use it for our good. We can do more with less data. That's something which we will be saying this year. When the refers to digital sovereignty, I hope that means what Commissioner Breton said, that Europeans want to be in the control of the data about themselves. That is something that the data protection community certainly can and should suggest to all the policymakers for next years. Thank you very much, and I hope we will have a very good discussion on this subject this day. Thank you.